We've got 9,000 human diseases. We have interventions for maybe 500 of these. And the overwhelming majority of the other ones, there are 0 people working on treatments for them. That's one of the big lies of biomedical research.
If you have somebody in your family who has gotten a diagnosis of ALS or glioblastoma or pancreatic cancer or Alzheimer's, your hair is on fire.
Our lives are at stake if we don't solve the problems of giving people new organs. Our lives are literally at stake if we don't find better ways to deal with the fact that we got to get rid of that tumor.
Alzheimer's disease is a ticking time bomb. We can't just hide our heads in the sand and say, well, that's just old people. No.
We're faced with an emergency. People are dying from cancer by the hundreds of thousands per year.
We have over 2 million people in this country today already addicted to opioids. 150 parents will be at a cemetery today burying a child.
I may be in my platoon fighting the war on pancreas cancer every day, and a lot of the research and a lot of the questions being asked are being done at like a war college. And now we're fighting guerrilla warfare, and things have changed.
The mortality rate on pancreatic cancer is the highest of any cancer, and it has remained the same for 40 years. Regardless of all the efforts, we have not scored any points.
I would hope that they would find something, if not for me, at least for others.
We get so wrapped up in extensive process, discussions, 17,000 committees debating something, that the movement of it is like a caterpillar.
I've got a disease with a median survival of 14 months. What's the average time it takes to get a clinical trial from inception through to conclusion? Way longer than my average median lifespan. So that's fundamentally wrong.
The patients are waiting. You have to get up every morning and have that image in your mind. The patients are waiting.
HARPA was born out of a recognition by many, many people that there was a need for thinking very differently towards healthcare.
It's not about a one disease. It's something that will impact autism, glioblastoma multiforme, pancreatic cancer, multiple sclerosis, stroke. The goal of HARPA should be developing those things that are foundational but have broad applicability. When you think about what the United States invests, it's someplace between $50 and $60 billion a year of R&D dollars. Over 10 years, we're talking $500 to $600 billion. How much of that has actually been translated into actually improving clinical care?
The NIH has achieved a peer review structure that funds work by senior investigators, and it tends to fund work that is frankly a bit conservative. And so it tends to fund safe bets, but sometimes safe bets aren't the biggest impact bets.
So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the people that have the time and take the time to write the grants and to go through the process get the grants. The problem is that a lot of the decisions are being made by people that haven't seen patients in quite some time, and the people that are researching at times great questions, but maybe aren't the appropriate questions that are going to impact the patient that's sitting right in front of me.
It's a cultural chasm between white-coated researchers in universities and the movers and shakers in biotech startup communities.
Just because you have good individuals on a team doesn't mean you're going to be successful. You can go through a whole season and not win a game. It's possible. And that's a little bit of what we have with pancreatic cancer. We have a lot of projects running around, but they're not organized against a particular result in a particular time frame.
There are a lot of things that NIH can't do, or NIH, I've been there. I understand the process. You send in a grant, 9 months later you get an answer. Maybe it's yes, maybe it's no, maybe it's we're waiting to see. You go into the private sector and somebody comes into usually a private leadership and says, we have a hot idea, we can do this. He says, fine, here's the money, do it tomorrow.
There are massive technologies being developed that are being applied in other fields, but not healthcare. That kills me because it's true.
You know, Brian was every parent's dream. Always smiling. Brian became addicted to alcohol and pot over a period of months, but then he was legally prescribed Xanax, and that put him off on a whole different trail. He went to 8 different treatment programs over the next 8 years, but when he got out, he always relapsed fairly quickly. He was told by the outpatient program that he no longer needed to be there. And the next morning, he woke up and took his own life. After my son passed away, when I was able to step back and really try to understand what had happened, and I found out there was all this research sitting in peer-reviewed medical journals that's already been funded by NIH research over the last 2 decades that neither I as a parent or the treatment programs that treated my son were aware of or were using. I'm reading about programs, research, that could have saved my son's life and hundreds of thousands of others just like my son.
This epidemic is a national health emergency.
Today, the president is talking about the opioid crisis. Everybody's panicking, and they're right. This is a terrible thing. You know what my PhD dissertation was in 1982? It was methadone physical dependence and pharmacokinetics. Methadone physical dependence, that is methadone addiction. That's 1982.
We need to restructure how we do these things so that we know, is this a good pathway or maybe we need to abandon it? And we need to be able to do those things rapidly and not spend 5, 10 years or 15 years working on them till we reach those conclusions.
In the NIH, the funding is to develop knowledge. Knowledge is excellent. Knowledge is the underpinnings of everything. But somebody then has to pick up that knowledge and transform it into a capability.
And if you don't do that, you're going to have the valley of death, and you're going to have products that are sitting on shelves and people continuing to suffer when we don't need to.
A basic researcher, say at an academic institution, comes up with some molecule that might be able to deal with some problem. Let's say some type of cancer. Then a biotech company tries to take it a little further down the highway to bedside.
And in the middle is a high-risk, expensive area to do research where you're taking the knowledge created by the basic research done by the NIH and translating it into products that actually affect our healthcare system.
I call it the valley of opportunity, not the valley of death. People are always so busy at looking at what failed. Let's analyze what failed. I like to look at what has succeeded. Who are the few people, or what are the few drug programs that have been fantastic in doing them in a lean and mean way and getting to patients. For some patients, if they don't get the treatment, they won't get a second try.
And the reason why we need an agency to do that is because it is a market failure. It's too risky for the private sector, and it's too applied for most NIH funding.
What's going to sit there between the guys that are doing this research on something that looks like it's pretty promising, but it's got to go through that valley? Somebody's got to de-risk it so that these big companies, A, have a high probability that it'll work, and B, it's not going to take 10 years to find out. That's what HARPA ought to be doing.
Suzanne had stomach pains. Pain got worse. So we had a CT scan. It discovered a blockage in her bile duct. So we went in immediately for surgery. The doctor came out and he said the reason the blockage exists is because of a pancreatic cancer. I think I died right at that moment. We hoped with just some luck that she'd get a year. Maybe with a lot of luck, a year and a half. And in the end, she'd only got 9 months.
you're pointing out that pancreatic cancer has seen the least progress. Probably no
Pancreatic cancer
progress, right?
never got in the war. The numbers that you showed up there have really not significantly changed at all in 40 years. There had to be a better way to go about dealing with pancreatic cancer than the way it was being dealt with. And I can say that from personal experience of being 9 months with my wife dying and calling up and dealing with scientists and doctors and hospitals all over the place. And hearing from people and everything that the system was broken. It's just broken. It's not productive.
The term HARPA, the Health Advanced Research Project Agency, is really one that Bob Wright coined. It is the philosophy of DARPA. It is the can-do attitude of DARPA.
Back in the late 50s, we set up an organization called DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects, and that was a very successful project.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
You had a country who beat the U.S. in the launching a satellite into space, and they spent a fraction of the dollars that the U.S. spends on high technology at that time. The bottom line was, we got beat.
DARPA, shaping the future.
DARPA has led to remarkable capabilities for the U.S. and for the world, really.
It helped create the internet. Robotics really came out of that research and that collaborative effort. AI has really come out of that effort.
Night vision goggles came out of a DARPA program. Stealth technology, drones, titanium steel. Ultrasound scanner was actually developed to look for discontinuities in airplane tires.
DARPA said, let's make a navigation system in which we can put satellites out in space and tell you exactly where you are anywhere on Earth. That wasn't a slight improvement over a map. They said, we may fail, but if it works, we'll transform navigation.
So DARPA does not give out grants, it issues contracts.
Not talking about $3 million gifts, you're talking about $30 million programs, $40 million programs, or 50. And that's how we have to think of this. You'd rather have 3 of those than 150 $1 million grants.
That's what HARPA would do, start with that structure.
An organization like HARPA should work hand in hand with the NIH, the FDA, absolutely, the CDC, CMS, absolutely, DOD, yes, the VA. They should be working across the entire spectrum.
I was hiking with some girlfriends, and we got to a point in the hill where we were trying to decide whether to go further or not, and I started to feel really odd. And then I could see my eyelids closing, and I passed out. What had happened is I'd had a massive seizure. I had a CT scan followed by an MRI, and then 2 days later I had brain surgery to remove a grape-sized tumor that was then discovered to be a glioblastoma. Most government institutions, many of which employ fantastically able people who were busting a gut to try and save the lives of people like me, but we're not actually getting it right. It's not working. We need a new approach.
The NIH does a marvelous job. Why not marry NIH's talents and assets to the private sector assets, and then invite people who have good ideas to come in so you can move the process?
We need to actually do focused research to put in people, to get treatments to people. That's the real goal.
There's an infrastructure there and there's an ecosystem. If HARPA could say, I'm going to integrate teams that don't exist now to work on projects that nobody's really got the ability or risk tolerance to do, but I'm going to do it focused on creating a disruptive way to improve healthcare. And if they could identify some of those opportunities, they would transform healthcare.
It's declaring up front what you want, as opposed to let's do exploratory science and see where it leads us. This is very different. You structure that model, then you put a timeline to it. What does that bring in? Accountability. You would hold your contractor accountable for the money you gave them to put your kitchen in. If your kitchen's not being put in on time or the way you'd like it, you would become very annoyed. Very annoyed. It's no different than doing a build like that. It is oversight. Accountability, when you have such a framework in place, you now can hold people accountable, which means is program management, management of the dollar, being a good caretaker of the taxpayer's dollar is in fact possible doing it this way, is it not?
We've got to find a way to speed up the whole process, and we've got to find a way to factor in the subjective measures that come from the patient experience.
And if we're willing to do that, give the patient what they want, we'll completely change the discussion. A diabetic does not want a better way to measure their blood glucose. A diabetic wants to eat a donut. If we sat down and said to ourselves, how can we get it so that the diabetic can eat a donut without thinking about it? Now we're on to something.
I believe the patients are doing research. And what I mean by that is the patients go into trials, they are taking our medicines or treatments, they're reporting back their side effects, they're reporting back how it's working for them.
When I was in Afghanistan in 2003, there wasn't a day went by that I didn't take care of some Afghan child that was brought to our combat support hospital missing a limb. And you realize that the prosthetic that they're going to be given is very rudimentary. A hook, perhaps. And then later on in 2005, when I went and I served in Iraq, I was seeing American soldiers, the same thing. And when they came back, best of Western medicine still gave them a hook. To me, that just wasn't adequate. You step back and you look at this and say, let's change the discussion.
He comes in, he sits in my conference room. Now look, at the end of the Civil War, we gave people a wooden stick with a hook on it after they gave their arms for the Army. He said, now, when one of our young soldiers comes back missing an arm, we don't give him a wooden stick with a hook on it. We give him a plastic stick with a hook on it.
Let's ask instead what that young soldier wants. I want an arm just like Luke Skywalker's got. You know, I want a robot arm. Feels like an arm, looks like an arm. No different. I can go to the mall, nobody even knows I've lost my arm.
He's pounding the table. That's gotta stop. We've got to give him way more than this hook. They want to pick up their kids. And he went through this list of everything he wants, and we're thinking, yeah, this guy is nuts. And then he says, and I want him in 2 years.
We have his robot arm in 2 years, and can we be attaching it to a human in 4 years? His arm now, as you know, is FDA approved. The DEC arm is approved. Other patients are getting these things put in so they can have a workout. All great. But guess what? Something else happened. We learned that the brain can directly control a robot arm, did we not? Take off the word arm. We now learn the brain can control a robot. It opens a tremendous space, doesn't it? Again, a foundational technology that opens a world of opportunity. That's the point.
I see HARPA fitting in organizing and facilitating collaboration and research amongst multiple disciplines, multiple centers, and multiple industries. I have to believe that if you can coordinate groups meeting together, having a leader that can focus that group, and enabling them to share data in a very effective way, and run trials together and ask the right questions, that would have a huge impact in the war that we're fighting right now.
There's just no reason, no good reason, why this shouldn't be done. It's efficient, it's going to attract attention to the right people. It brings major biotechnology companies into the game of accelerating something, to make something happen, giving them the kick that they need to get it done.
I had some discomfort in my abdomen, and it didn't go away. It took about a month of going through blood tests and endoscopies to find out actually what it was.
So when she said, you have pancreatic cancer, I'm like, I mean, you know, we're talking death sentence. And our world changed at that moment. He did his chemo and then he did his radiation. And 2 weeks after the radiation stopped, it came back, same place. So then we knew that we're on the buying time.
Right.
we're on a different
extending
track now.
life.
Extending his quality of life
Right.
track.
Nobody's going to cure pancreatic cancer on their own. It is going to be a nationalized community effort.
I think early detection is very important, and it certainly offers the possibility, the greatest chance of cure.
If we were able to be supported in that effort by a large-scale initiative like HARPA that would allow us to work productively together and not just compete individually for NIH research grants, but even more importantly, provided a platform and seed money for us to partner with industry, the sky would be the limit.
It's a whole different game if you get in there very early. If we got 10% reduction, that's 5,000 people would be saved immediately. When you have 45,000 people diagnosed in stage 4, knowing that they're going to die very quickly, that's an emergency.
I honestly believe that we could triple or quadruple survival from pancreatic cancer by the end of the next decade, pursuing that type of model.
If HARPA existed today, I would instantly develop the technology to understand the prescribing practices of every single doctor in this country who prescribes opioids, and to be able to report on that on a quarterly basis with only a 30-day lag, so we can immediately spot which prescribers in this country were prescribing outside of CDC guidelines.
One of the country's epidemic problems is youth anxiety disorders. It's seen as probably the number 1 or number 2 leading psychiatric problem, and it is extraordinary how widespread it is. Now, you can try to generate as many counselors and treating people as possible to do it. But what if you can do it technologically? What if you can do it with virtual reality?
It is incredibly frustrating for people who are living with these diseases, but also for researchers who really do want to create the kind of tools and treatments that could help people. Disorders like autism and schizophrenia are notoriously complex and difficult to understand at a biological level. An organization like HARPA could start to do that kind of advanced work.
I would like to see more in the way of translation of the basic science that we understand into clinically utilizable interventions.
In theory, you could actually take advantage of the fact that there have been millions of people who have been treated for diseases across the entire world. And a lot of them have electronic health records.
I think it's so simple, to be honest with you. You take a company like Google, right, that could mine data better than anyone. And instead you have me mining it in my office late at night.
If we looked at all the people that had that disease before, looked at what works, in whom, and when. So we find the people that look like you were treated this way did the best. That's where we should start our treatment, not based on your doctor's anecdote that they had a patient last year that looked like you, let's treat you the way they treated that one patient. And so you could apply that sort of thing to glioblastoma and a lot of other diseases as well.
There's been a revolution in nanotechnology. One can imagine a little grain of rice-sized device that's implantable under the skin. The ability to now apply that to the early detection of cancer. I think it would be only an entity like HARPA that could bring together the biomedical and the engineering communities.
We think if we can bring together all the engineering disciplines we need and understand what the recipe is for this magic goo, we might be able to turn it from, a laboratory amazing accomplishment to an industrial scale solution to a problem.
The cost to our society of the opiate epidemic is enormous. $200 billion to $500 billion, depending on how you count it, every single year. And you have a solution that would cost way less than $50 million a year. The multiple on that is enormous of what it would save, let alone the human suffering.
The flag for this race to begin of filling HARPA comes when the president hopefully signs an executive order.
The President of the United States directs his agency to come up with a plan for what HARPA would look like. How would it function? What would its size be? What would its focus be? And then issue a report, if you will, or a blueprint to Congress that explains, here's what we could do to drive innovation in biomedical research and address some of the market failures that exist today.
I think there is a deep wellspring of feeling in the country among people generally that they want Congress to get off of the dysfunction they've been involved in and get some things that are important done.
You've got some extraordinary people in Congress and the administration. If you have somebody who's dedicated enough, they'll find ways of getting what you want done.
And within 6 months, we should be up and running.
The return on investment for the United States government will be huge. There's no question about that. We absolutely know that taxpayers will save money by investing in this new agency.
Having a diagnosis like this makes you think, you know, what's really important? And what's really important to me is the fact that I really love life. But the other thing that fuels me is I can see that we have a system that could do a lot better. Not just for me, but for anybody with cancer.
I feel like they're going to cure it the minute he's gone. It's going to be my luck. And I'm really going to be mad.
I would think that there would be a big role for government in helping with this. Not only pancreatic, but the other ones that are hard. I mean, it's one thing that's great about our country is that there's lots of people working on lots of different cures. I think we'd be all a lot better off if there was one central place.
I have patients in their 20s, I have patients in their 30s, I have patients I'm operating on whose wives are pregnant in the waiting room.
Yes, there are a lot of headlines. Yes, the federal government is funding billions of dollars to states to help with this issue. But are we really creating lasting change? Only the federal government can build the infrastructure to provide the capability of our healthcare system to implement research within a matter of months, not decades.
When I've talked to people about this and they just say, my God, it's so obvious. Why doesn't that happen?
HARPA should stand up on its own. One thing that the Department of Defense learned back in 1957, it was a brand new model. It was revolutionary. So if you want something to do something revolutionary, you have to create a revolutionary apparatus for it. It can't be built within the same old structure.
If you don't take extreme positions in areas where there's nothing's going on, you're not going to get anywhere.
Either crashing and burning or wildly succeeding, either one of those is a better outcome than the kind of warm death of mediocrity, of moving along a little bit at a time. So try to do the big stuff. If you succeed once in a while, and we only succeed once in a while, you can change the world.
We have to say, how can we be quicker, more nimble, more focused in getting treatments to patients? The patients are waiting.
And what I think is super smart about HARPA is that it absolutely reeks innovation and calls for a sense of urgency, and to forget one's area of expertise or the institution that you work from, come together as people who have different levels of expertise to share around keeping people like me alive.